A lot of us are thinking that productivity didn't go up in those last 20 years. This could be the moment to really accelerate a rethinking, a reimagining of how we're working.
Welcome to Fast Forward, where we're talking to some big picture thinkers about the impact of the pandemic to help our UK customers plan for the future. Today we're going to be looking at the return to the office and how marketers can think about getting that inspiration and buzz back into their teams in what for many will be a new hybrid way of working. I'm joined by Bruce Daisley, the ex-Twitter VP and workplace culture expert, best-selling author of The Joy of Work, and many will know him from the podcast Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, which is one of my favourites. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really grateful.
So Bruce, everyone is trying to work out what the return to the office is going to look like. In your book, you talk about how workplace buzz and kind of inspiration within the team is a combination of positive affect and psychological safety. And I want to understand how those things have changed over the last 12 months, where you think people are at with those, and also how in the move to hybrid working, bosses can ensure that those things are there so that they've got really strong buzz in their teams. Maybe start with positive affect, because people will probably be less familiar with that. Can you just explain a bit what you mean by that and what's happened in the last 12 months?
The fundamental notion of positive psychology is the idea that our brains work in a different way when we're in a good mood, when we're in a state of what is called by psychologists positive affect. So when we're in this productive, creative frame of mind, our brains seem to work in a different way. When people are in a productive frame of mind, they're far more likely to spot creative links between things. They're far more likely to be collaborative. They're far more likely to foster connections between people and ideas. So really powerful device. But I guess the way that we would probably be thinking about the world in the last 12 months is that rather than this positive affect, this good sunny mood transcending and descending upon us, we've actually witnessed a degree of negative affect. So we've talked about burnout, we've talked about people working in an unsustainable way. And all of that you'd call negative affect. So firstly, it raises the really important question. How do we foster a sense of balance? How do we foster a focus on well-being in our teams? There's some research that came out a couple of months ago by one of the communications tools that people have been using that said that that meetings have gone up by 2.5-fold in the last 12 months. So we've found ourselves meeting more. And one of the things that can result from that, people can just feel completely spent. They can feel like all of their attention energy is being used up on their jobs. So that would put us in a state of negative affect. And probably any of us, as we're looking to a different state of affairs, moving out of our households, moving out of our bedrooms, getting back into work in some capacity, probably a bias towards well-being and looking after ourselves, getting into a state of positive affect is going to have a really beneficial uplift on our workplace culture, on our team dynamics, far more than we might initially second guess, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And obviously lots that leaders can do to support their teams in that. And it might seem a little bit frivolous, but actually it sounds like it's really, really important.
Yeah, and look, one of the most critical things throughout all of this, when you're looking at well-being, I've been spending a lot of time in the last 12 months researching resilience. And one of the things that you discover about resilience and well-being is one of the most important parts of it is a sense of control. And so a few of us have had that feeling in the course of the last year, especially when the nights were dark and the mornings sort of felt like the darkness was never ending. We often would open our calendar and would see back-to-back meetings, and it creates that breathlessness, that sense, I'm not sure I can deal with this, another day like this, that sense of when you're stealing a moment to run to the bathroom. That lack of control actually has a really big bearing on our well-being. It has a really big bearing on how we're feeling. And so if you're a leader, one of the things that you might do is you might say, okay, I want to ensure that we're balancing the demands upon our team with the freedom to get their job done. I found myself as a leader of a big and complicated team. And actually what I discovered was reducing the amount of demands on the team, reducing the amount of asks of them. What it did is it allowed their personal autonomy to fill that space. So it's really interesting. One of the most important things that leaders can do is probably think, how do I create less demands on my team? How do I create fewer expectations on them and allow them to fill the gap with their own sort of free thinking and imagination, really?
And how does that connect with what's different about psychological safety? Because it seems quite related as you describe it there. What's different and what's happened to that in the last 12 months?
Psychological safety is our ability to speak candidly to each other without the fear of the consequence. So the way that Amy Edmondson, the woman who really pioneered the work in it, she says, for fear of appearing ignorant, we often don't ask questions. For fear of appearing obstructive, we don't raise concerns. We're all adapting the impression we give to each other. And if we can overcome that, if we can reach this productive disagreement, if we can reach a place where actually we're able to have frank discussions with each other without fear of sort of consequence, without fear of retribution, if we can reach that, then it's psychological safety, and it seems to correlate with the best performing teams. Now, how has that changed in the last 12 months? How has our ability to speak candidly to each other changed? A lot of people report when they're on small video calls with sort of a handful of people, maybe where you can arrange all of their faces in the windows in front of you. People have said, oh, we've found that our dialogue has been candid, productive, straight with each other. Obviously, when you're on video calls where you don't recognize everyone and, there's hundreds of you, it's probably more difficult. But when we're using the technology well, a lot of people have said it's enabled my team to feel more connected than ever before. I've also heard this from leaders who maybe work with distributed teams in different countries. And they've said, I would go to each market once every 6 months. Now I'm dialing in and talking to the people in that market once every 2 or 3 weeks. And it's transformed my connection with them. That's really interesting. It's intriguing that probably the notion that we've got is being in a room is more intimate, but we've discovered it unlocks other things. I saw the screenwriter, J.J. Abrams, and he said his first instinct, a lifetime in creativity, his first instinct was you can't be creative in video calls. And what he discovered very quickly was, it's different. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's like riding a bike in that capacity. But actually, what it's enabled us to do is to have a far more diverse group of people distributed in different places, in times and places that suit them. So it allowed us to broaden our creative input.
In terms of those moments that help build trust, what kind of things are we talking about? What have we missed out because of working from home? I think there's some interesting science around people's eye contact, people's physical contact. Tell us a bit about that.
A lot of us, one of the things that we experience, whether we're in the audience of a presentation or whether we're in the boardroom having a discussion, when someone looks you in the eye and asks you a question, there's something that is a moment of connection. It's a moment of sort of interrogation to some extent. Like it has this energy to it that sometimes we miss when we're trying to do something through a screen. And it's a really interesting reminder. There's some fascinating science into some of this. When athletes are asked to train in a room with each other and they're training around, when you get a substantially different effect when they're training in sync with each other, when effectively they're in stroke with each other, when they're trying to adapt to each other, than when they're just doing it individually. One of the ways that you'll see that is that their endorphin, their pleasure hormones, are twice as high when they're doing it in sync with each other. So, there's some real evidence that there's something baked into our wiring that seems to mean that when we have a connection with people, it transforms our experience. More accessible ways that we might witness this are when we're laughing in a group. Massive surge of endorphins. You also get it when people sing in choirs together. You also get it when people dance together. So any of these actions that are in some way shared and coordinated seem to have a big upside. The really intriguing part is that we don't seem to get, based on the evidence, we don't seem to get anywhere near that endorphin rush when we do it through a screen.
Some businesses have obviously been experimenting with this for some time, pre-pandemic, and have got lots of experience in terms of the kind of hybrid working we're now looking at. Who would you say have done this well or done it badly and learned from it, Bruce?
So, firstly, there's a few firms who went remote by accident, and that might be organizations like Basecamp, software company based out of Chicago. What they discovered very quickly was that the office has got a network effect, and they'd unplugged from it. So they allowed workers to work remotely whenever they wanted. And what they discovered was workers would make the journey into the office on Tuesday, and unless all of their colleagues were there, the office just seemed empty. The office seemed stripped from its superpower. And so then what would happen on the following day, workers would think, I was going to go into the office today, but there was no one there. All the people I was calling were at home. And so they stopped going in. And so without planning, without forward planning, the office very quickly can lose its superpower, that network effect. And there's another organization we can look at. So the organization that makes WordPress is called Automatic. Now, they discovered that this urgent rush that we all have to get to a workplace, an office every day, was deeply unproductive. It was costing their workers time every day. And so they said, how about we change our relationship with the office? If the old relationship that we had with our workplace was that people spent 11 months a year together in it and 1 month a year away from each other, on vacation, on holiday. How about we do it in a different way, which is we spend 11 months of the year away from each other and 1 month a year, effectively 1 week a quarter in each other's company. They made that compulsory, so you needed to put your childminder or your dog sitter on call, and they would get their colleagues together for one energized week every quarter. Really interesting, because firstly, there's a really fundamental recognition that being around each other gives us this energized connection. It's what Brené Brown calls collective effervescence. This fizz that comes from being around our colleagues, and trust is built in that capacity. But they said, rather than trying to do this on a Wednesday afternoon, on a Thursday morning, on these stolen half moments here or there, why don't we do it far more consciously, getting our teams together through these moments of proper connection where we're eating together, we're laughing together, we're talking together. So really interesting. I think there's lots of lessons from the firms who've gone before, and the lessons are sitting there ready for us to tap into if we're willing to open our minds and listen to their experience.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Now, before we go, I just want to get your top tips for the marketing and business leaders who are thinking about the return to the office right now. What would they be?
Well, it's a great time for marketers, actually, because a lot of the things that marketers have had to do over the last few years are the things that are going to help us succeed right now. Experiments being the first one. So I think, really critically, it's about thinking of what experiments you're going to try, telling your team or asking your team to tell you how you're going to measure those experiments, and then really setting ourselves up to iterate, develop and iterate. Classic things that marketers have been practicing and preaching for years. So I think really critical moment for evidence-based experimentation. And I think that's why it's so exciting. A lot of us are thinking that productivity didn't go up in those last 20 years. This could be the moment to really accelerate a rethinking, a reimagining of how we're working. Obviously, there's a lot of fear amongst getting it wrong, and that's why experiments are such a valuable contribution to what comes next.
Thank you so much, Bruce. It's been lovely speaking to you and getting your perspective.
Thank you.
Now, if you enjoyed that, we've got some great speakers lined up from inside and outside of Google over the coming weeks and months. You can subscribe to this YouTube channel or follow Think with Google UK on Twitter or LinkedIn. Thanks very much.